A police deputy was patrolling the icy backroads of Frost Hollow with his loyal canine partner Rook when headlights suddenly flared in his rearview mirror. In an instant, a vehicle slammed into them, sending their cruiser skidding off the road and into the snowbound trees. Flames rose from the wreck, and everyone believed Rook had perished in the crash. But through the smoke and bitter cold, the shepherd was still out there, wounded but alive, carrying with him the first clue to a conspiracy that reached the highest seat of power in town. What Rook did in the days that followed wasn't just survival, it was devotion. He shielded his handler from danger, uncovered the truth, and brought down the man who had tried to erase them both. What happened next will move you, and remind you that loyalty, courage, and second chances still exist in this world. Tell me where you are watching from by leaving your country in the comments. And if you believe that every animal deserves not only a safe home but a purpose, hit the subscribe button because this story and this bond may change the way you see loyalty forever. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel to see the next stories by clicking the subscribe button right below the video. Thank you. Amen. Frost Hollow, Montana, was a place where winter didn't just arrive, it staked its claim and dared anyone to challenge it. By late January, the mountains loomed like shadowed fortresses, their flanks buried under thick layers of snow that swallowed sound and light. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, each breath carrying the scent of pine, diesel, and distant wood smoke. Along Highway 214, the two-lane ribbon that wound through the surrounding hills, a storm had been working its way down from the high peaks since sundown. The wind dragged veils of snow sideways across the asphalt, erasing the horizon. Deputy Noah Calder, 34 years old, had grown up in Frost Hollow and looked like he'd been carved from the same weather-beaten timber as the town's oldest cabins. Tall, broad-shouldered, and built for endurance more than speed, his frame filled the driver's seat of the Ford Police Interceptor. His short, dark brown hair was flecked with early strands of gray at the temples, and a faint scar traced from the corner of his left eyebrow down toward his cheekbone. A reminder from a knife fight years ago when he'd been a rookie in Billings. His eyes were a stormy steel blue, the kind that could level a suspect's story without a word. Beneath the stoic exterior, those who knew him well saw the quieter truths: loyalty to a fault, and an unshakable sense of duty sharpened by the sudden loss of his younger sister in a hit-and-run a decade earlier. That unsolved case had been the fuse for his career in law enforcement. Beside him sat Rook, his canine partner of 4 years. Rook was a 5-year-old male German shepherd with a sable coat that caught glints of gold under light, powerful haunches, and a noble head framed by sharply pointed ears. His amber eyes were alive with intelligence and vigilance, the kind that never seemed to blink during patrols. A faint notch in his right ear and an old scar along his flank hinted at a career of close calls. Where Noah was measured and methodical, Rook was instinctive and assertive, with a working dog's focus that could snap from calm to action in a heartbeat. Tonight, their patrol was routine, or as routine as it got on winter nights when the roads iced over and cell coverage dropped in and out. The radio was mostly static, punctuated now and then by chatter from dispatch. Frost Hollow's downtown was a scattering of lit storefronts huddled against the wind, but the real quiet lay beyond. The switchbacks, the forested cutaways, the blind corners where deer crossed without warning. Noah guided the cruiser along a bend, windshield wipers fighting to clear the wind-driven snow. "Storm's settling in, partner," he murmured. Rook shifted in his seat, ears swiveling toward the sound of the tires grinding over patches of ice. It was their silent ritual, Noah talking, Rook listening, a habit that kept the long hours from feeling too empty. They had just cleared mile marker 52 when it happened. A sudden glare bloomed in the rearview mirror. Headlights, high beams, far too close. Noah's pulse jumped. Before he could touch the radio, the vehicle behind them surged forward. The crunch of metal was deafening as the SUV slammed into the rear quarter panel. The impact whipped the cruiser sideways, tires losing grip on the black ice. Noah fought the wheel, but the road offered nothing back. "Hold on," he barked, but the words were stolen by the wind. The Interceptor spun, skidded across the frozen shoulder, and vaulted over the embankment. For a brief, impossible moment, Noah saw the world tilt. Snow, trees, darkness, before the cruiser landed nose first into the slope. The airbags exploded with a muted whump. Pain flared in his ribs. Somewhere in the chaos, the tang of gasoline cut through the cold air. The SUV above didn't stop. Its taillights vanished into the storm. Noah's vision swam as he tried to orient himself. The cruiser's hood was crumpled against a half-buried boulder, steam hissing from the radiator. Flames licked under the frame, their light dancing in frantic orange pulses. He turned toward Rook's seat, but the harness was empty. The door on the passenger side had been flung open in the impact. "Rook!" His voice cracked, raw from the seatbelt's jolt. Through the fractured windshield he caught a glimpse. Rook sprawled on the snow several feet away, his body still, a dark patch of blood matting the fur near his shoulder. For a second that lasted far too long, Noah couldn't move. Then training took over. He shoved the driver's door with his shoulder, stumbled into the waist-deep snow, and half-crawled toward the dog. Heat roared behind him. The cruiser's fuel tank gave a warning groan. He reached Rook's side, fingers searching desperately for breath, a pulse. There was one, faint, uneven. But before he could lift him, the fire surged, forcing Noah back. A shockwave from the exploding engine block knocked him to one knee, snow filling his gloves. When he looked up again through the haze of smoke and snow, Rook was gone. He staggered to his feet, scanning the whiteout, calling his partner's name over and over. Only the wind answered, carrying with it the distant wail of a siren far up the road. By the time emergency crews arrived, the fire had reduced the cruiser to a blackened shell. No sign of Rook. The search that followed turned up nothing, just churned snow, scorch marks, and the twisted remains of Noah's gear. Hours later, as he sat in the frosted back of an ambulance, ribs strapped and vision clouded with exhaustion, he overheard the chatter between two volunteer firefighters. "They say the dog didn't make it. Poor guy, died doing his job." Noah closed his eyes, jaw locking. They were already writing Rook off as gone, another line in a duty log. But deep in his gut, Noah knew he couldn't let the story end here. He'd find out who was behind that SUV, and he'd find out what really happened to Rook. Dead or alive, no one was going to erase his partner without answering for it. Snow drifted steadily down over Frost Hollow as the ambulance doors closed. The storm had eased, but the cold held Frost Hollow in its iron grip. 2 days after the crash, the mountains were silent under a heavy quilt of snow, their peaks cutting clean lines into a brittle blue sky. The roads remained treacherous, the drifts deep enough to swallow fence posts along the outer stretches of Highway 214. In town, life went on with that stubborn resilience mountain folk carried like a badge, but whispers about the accident drifted through coffee shops and hardware stores. Some called it a tragic loss, others a suspicious incident. Deputy Noah Calder spent those days in forced stillness, his ribs bound, a dull ache throbbing behind his left temple. His small cabin on the edge of Frost Hollow overlooked a frozen stretch of Willow Creek, and through the frost-glazed windows he could see the wind carving ghostly patterns across the surface. The days blurred together in a haze of pain medication and restless thoughts. His phone buzzed constantly, colleagues checking in, the sheriff offering leave, well-meaning neighbors bringing casseroles. But all he could think about was Rook's absence. The official line was that the dog had died in the crash, but Noah couldn't shake the image of those paw prints he thought he'd glimpsed before the smoke swallowed his vision. That image became reality for Quinn Delaney on the third night. Quinn, 32, worked as a senior paramedic for the Frost Hollow Emergency Services. She was tall, with an athletic build born of years lifting stretchers and navigating icy sidewalks with gear slung across her back. Her auburn hair was usually pulled into a practical braid, and a faint sprinkle of freckles spanned the bridge of her nose. Quinn carried herself with a quiet steadiness that people instinctively trusted, but under that composure was a reservoir of grief. 2 winters ago, she had lost her husband Eli, a volunteer firefighter, to a propane explosion at a remote cabin. The loss hardened her, not into bitterness, but into an unwillingness to waste time on anything that didn't matter. She was driving back from a late-night call in the outskirts when she decided to swing past the site of Noah's crash, not out of morbid curiosity, but because she'd known Rook since his first days in training. Eli had sometimes joined canine drills, and she'd fed the dog treats in the station break room more than once. The county plows had cleared the main road, but the embankment where the interceptor had gone down was still a churn of snow and ice. The blackened husk of the cruiser had been towed away, leaving only scorched earth and twisted guardrail. Parking her ambulance a few yards away, Quinn stepped into the biting air, pulling her thick parka tight. Her boots crunched over frozen crust as she scanned the slope. A few minutes of searching brought her to something half-buried near the tree line, a set of paw prints, large and deep, the gait uneven as if the animal had favored one side. The prints led not toward the road but away from it, angling into the dark wall of pine. She crouched, brushing snow from the indentations. Definitely a German shepherd, and recent maybe within 48 hours. Her stomach tightened. If Rook had made it out, he could be wounded, freezing, or both. Quinn straightened and scanned the forest edge, but the snow was too heavy and the moonlight too weak to show more. She pulled out her phone and hesitated. Calling the station would only get the same tired line. The dog's gone. Instead, she scrolled to Noah's number. Noah answered on the third ring, his voice rough with sleep. Called her. It's Quinn. I was at your crash site. Silence on the other end. Then a wary, why? I saw tracks, big ones, looked fresh, headed into the woods. Noah sat up, wincing as his ribs protested. You're sure? I've seen enough dogs to know. The gate's off, though. He's hurt. But he's moving. For a moment, Noah didn't reply. The cabin's clock ticked loudly in the pause. Then, you just gave me something I didn't have proof. I thought you'd want to know, Quinn said softly. Her decision to tell him wasn't without weight. She had her own mess to navigate. Connor Delaney, her 20-year-old brother, was teetering on the edge of ruin. Connor had the wiry frame and restless energy of someone always chasing the next thrill, his sandy blonde hair perpetually in need of a cut. He'd been charming as a boy, but after Eli's death, something in him shifted. He drifted toward the wrong crowd local dealers who used the frozen isolation of Frost Hollow to move product without drawing too much outside attention. For weeks, Quinn had been trying to pull him back, offering to help him find work, threatening to call in favors with the sheriff's office, even stashing away money to get him out of town for a while. But Connor's debts weren't small, and the men he owed weren't forgiving. Quinn had overheard enough in whispered phone calls to know he was tangled with people tied to Grantham & Sons Construction, a company that had its hands in too many dirty pockets in the county. That night, after speaking with Noah, she drove straight to her small rental house on Birch Lane. The heater was rattling in the corner, and Connor was on the couch, hoodie up, staring at his phone. You hear about Calder's dog? She asked casually. Connor barely looked up. Yeah, dead, right? Maybe not, she said, hanging up her coat. And you're staying away from Grantham's guys, you hear me? He gave a humorless laugh. Sure. Just like you stayed away from the fire after Eli died. The words landed like a slap, but Quinn didn't bite back. She knew guilt was Connor's default defense. Across town, Noah stood at his kitchen counter, staring at the paw print photo Quinn had sent. A plan was already forming. He couldn't dive into the forest tonight, not in his condition, but as soon as he could move without feeling like his ribs were splitting, he'd be out there. And if Rook was alive, Noah wasn't coming back without him. Before he could think it through further, his phone buzzed again. It was Sheriff Walt Hargrove, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with wind-creased skin and a voice like gravel over coffee. Hargrove had been mentor and occasional adversary to Noah since he joined the force. You're not going to like this, the sheriff said. We got a tip anonymous telling us to drop the investigation on your crash. Mechanical failure, end of story. I'm not buying it, but my hands are tied for now. Noah's jaw tightened. Then I'll untie them. You focus on healing, Hargrove growled. We'll talk when you're not half broken. But Noah knew the window to act was shrinking. Whoever had rammed his cruiser wanted the trail cold. If Rook had escaped, he might have seen or scented something worth killing for. That made the dog a target as much as a survivor. The next morning, the storm broke completely, leaving the town in blinding sunlight that bounced off every icy surface. Quinn stopped by Noah's cabin with a thermos of coffee and a folded map of the forest trails branching from Highway 214. Together, they traced the possible routes from the crash site into the foothills. She pointed to a logging road that hadn't been plowed in years. Tracks could cut through here, she said. There's an old fire watch cabin 3 miles in. It'd give shelter from the wind. Noah studied her face. Why are you helping me, Quinn? Really? She hesitated, then answered simply, because you don't leave your partner behind. And because I've lost enough already. The unspoken words hung between them. Eli Connor, the countless patients she'd loaded into ambulances without knowing if they made it. They agreed to check the site together once Noah could handle the trek. For now, Quinn would keep an eye on the area during her shifts. Before she left, she handed him a radio. "Channel 6. If I see anything, you'll know right away." That night, long after Quinn had gone, Noah sat at his kitchen table, the radio beside him. Outside, the frost set hard under the stars. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a wounded shepherd might be threading his way through the snow, refusing to give in. And Noah Calder, battered but unbroken, vowed he'd follow that trail until it ended, no matter what waited at the other end. The morning broke cold and pale, a thin sun struggling to push its light through the gauzy veil of frost clinging to Frost Hollow's ridgelines. It had been 4 days since the crash, and Noah Calder's ribs still ached with each breath, but the restless edge inside him refused to let him sit another day by the window, staring at the frozen creek. He had Quinn's map in his pocket and the radio she'd left him clipped to his belt. The storm had left a crust over the snowpack, making each step crunch sharp in the stillness. Noah was dressed for the cold, layers of thermal beneath his uniform jacket, the sheriff's department patch dulled by wear. His boots were old but dependable, the same pair that had carried him through search and rescues in winters past. As he approached the old logging road Quinn had marked, he noticed the air change, quieter, heavier, as the pines closed in overhead, their branches bent under the weight of ice. The trail sloped gently upward for a mile before the first sign appeared, a shallow paw print, half filled with blown snow. The edges were recent enough to make his pulse kick. He crouched, fingertips brushing the print's inner curve, noting the drag mark along one side. Rook, hurt but moving. Halfway up the incline, Noah paused to catch his breath, leaning against the trunk of an old spruce. That's when he heard the faint crunch of snow behind him. He turned, hand brushing the butt of his sidearm, only to see Elias Moore, the county's senior game warden, emerging from the trees. Elias was in his early 60s, lean and tall with a wiry toughness that came from decades patrolling backcountry trails. His beard was white and trimmed close, his eyes a sharp hazel that could spot a coyote half a mile away. Elias had a reputation for speaking little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of long experience. He was dressed in his heavy canvas field coat, the hood lined with coyote fur, and carried a scoped .308 rifle slung over one shoulder. "Calder," Elias greeted with a curt nod. "Figured I might find you out here." "You tracking something?" Noah asked. Elias lifted a gloved hand toward the paw print. "Heard about your dog, saw prints near the fire road yesterday. Figured I'd follow him before the wind took him." They moved together in silence for another quarter mile, the trail narrowing into a snow-choked path flanked by granite outcrops. Eventually, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing where a weathered cabin crouched under a sagging roof of snow. The place was old, rough-hewn logs gone gray, shutters hanging askew, the front porch half collapsed. Noah felt the tight coil of anticipation in his chest. From inside came the faint scrape of movement. Noah stepped to the side of the doorway, easing it open just enough to peer in. The dim interior smelled of old wood, dust, and something warmer, the musk of dog. There, in the shadowed corner, lay Rook. His sable coat was dulled with dirt and matted with dried blood along his right flank. One front paw was bandaged crudely with what looked like a strip torn from an old flannel shirt. His head lifted at Noah's scent, and his amber eyes widened, recognition flaring. "Hey, partner," Noah said softly, dropping to one knee. Rook pushed himself up with effort, a low whine in his throat. As Noah reached out, his hand brushed against the dog's collar, and found something knotted into the leather strap. He worked it free, a torn piece of heavy canvas, stained at one edge, printed with the faded logo of Grantham & Sons Construction. Noah's mind clicked hard into gear. That company's name had been circling in his thoughts ever since Quinn mentioned her brother's debts. Now, it had found its way here, into the collar of a wounded canine who'd survived an attack meant for both of them. Elias stepped inside, studying the strip of fabric. "That didn't come off no hunting coat," he said. "That's work gear, sight jacket maybe." Noah nodded. "And Grantham's crew doesn't do business this far up unless they've got something to hide." With Elias's help, Noah examined Rook's injuries. The wound on his flank was deep but clean, likely a grazing bullet or jagged metal tear from the crash. The paw bandage was makeshift but had kept infection at bay. Rook must have been cared for, however briefly, before making it here. That meant someone had found him, and either let him go or wanted him to lead a trail. They rested long enough to give Rook water from Noah's canteen and a few protein bars crumbled into pieces. The dog ate slowly, never breaking eye contact with his handler, as if afraid Noah would vanish again. "Can you get him home?" Elias asked. Elias did. "I'll carry him if I have to," Noah replied. It took the better part of an hour to make it back to the main trail, Noah moving cautiously to keep from jarring Rook's injuries. Elias scouted ahead, rifle ready, scanning the tree line for movement. At one point, he paused and crouched, picking up something from the snow, a cigarette butt, still fresh enough to be warm in the center. He pocketed it without comment, but the look in his eyes told Noah he wasn't chalking it up to coincidence. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun was slipping behind the ridge, painting the snow in long shadows. At Noah's cabin, he laid Rook on a folded quilt near the wood stove, the dog sighing deeply as the warmth began to seep in. Noah sat on the floor beside him, the strip of Grantham fabric resting on his knee. The implications were ugly. Grantham's name tied to Connor's troubles, to the council's rumored kickbacks, and now, to the ambush that nearly killed him. He called Quinn. She answered on the first ring. "He's alive," Noah said simply. Her breath caught. "Where?" "In my living room, hurt but not broken. He had something on him, Grantham's logo." A pause. "Then we know where to start." As the fire crackled and Rook drifted into exhausted sleep, Noah felt the old sense of purpose stir in his chest. They weren't just going to find out who ran him off the road. They were going to peel back every layer of whatever Grantham and Sons had buried in Frost Hollow and drag it into the light. The snow in Frost Hollow had begun to thaw in patches, leaving dirty slush along the curbs and damp streaks running off the rooftops. A weak sun hung low over the mountains, glinting off the ice still clinging stubbornly to shaded gullies. For Noah Calder, it was the first sign that winter was loosening its grip. But for the people who wanted him gone, it was the season for carelessness, and he intended to use that. 2 days after finding Rook, Noah walked into the Frost Hollow Sheriff's Department with a stiff gait and an envelope in hand. His uniform was crisp, badge polished to a mirror finish, but his expression was measured. He found Sheriff Walt Hargrove in his office, sipping coffee from a dented thermos, the lines around his gray eyes deepening when he saw Noah. "Don't like the look of that envelope," Hargrove said. Noah set it on the desk. "It's my resignation effective immediately." Hargrove's brows knit. "You serious?" "Word on the street is I'm rattled, thinking of quitting. Let's make it official. If they think I'm out, they'll loosen their guard. I can move without them watching my badge." Hargrove studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're walking a fine line, Calder. You slip, I can't pull you out fast enough." "That's why I've got Rook," Noah said. While Noah planted the seed of his departure, Quinn Delaney was laying her own groundwork. She'd identified one of Grantham and Sons' mid-level supervisors, Mason Trigg, as someone who might be useful. Mason was in his late 40s, stocky with a permanent squint and a limp from an old workplace accident. He had a reputation for grumbling about management, and Quinn knew discontent could be leveraged. She found him at the Timberline Diner, a low-ceilinged place where the smell of fried eggs and coffee seeped into the walls. Mason was hunched over the counter, stirring sugar into his cup. Quinn, in her paramedic jacket, slid onto the stool beside him. "Heard Grantham's been late on payroll again," she said casually. Mason gave her a sidelong glance. "Late, short, and acting like we should be grateful. What's it to you?" Quinn leaned in, lowering her voice. "Let's just say I know someone who's interested in how Grantham's running things. Someone who might make your life easier." It took 2 more coffee refills and the promise of confidentiality, but Mason finally admitted that certain special projects had nothing to do with construction, more with moving unmarked crates under the cover of legitimate contracts. One of those projects, he said, answered directly to Mayor Curtis Halverson. Halverson had been mayor for 12 years, a man in his early 60s with a tall, imposing frame and silver hair kept in perfect order. To the public, he was all handshakes and ribbon cuttings, his baritone voice a fixture at every holiday parade. But those who'd known him longer remembered his days as a real estate lawyer who'd made small fortunes flipping land after rezoning deals, some legitimate, some not. Halverson had charm, but it was the kind that asked for something in return. Quinn took Mason's information straight to Noah. "It's him," she said. "Grantham's dirty work runs right to the mayor's office." Before they could act, trouble found Connor Delaney. Late one evening, Quinn got a frantic call from him. His voice was low, panicked. "They've got me moving a load tonight. If I don't, they'll—" The line went dead. Quinn's heart pounded as she relayed the situation to Noah. The location Connor had hinted at, a storage yard on the east edge of town, was known for being nearly abandoned after dark. It was perfect for a quiet handoff. Noah saw the opportunity and the danger all at once. "This is our bait," he said grimly. "We let them think the drop's going as planned, but we be there first." They moved fast. Noah left Rook in the cruiser initially, knowing the dog's instincts might kick too early. Quinn waited in her ambulance down the block, ready to block the exit if needed. The storage yard's chain-link fence sagged in places, the sodium lights overhead flickering weakly. Connor arrived with a beat-up pickup, his face pale under the brim of a ball cap. In the truck bed were 3 unmarked crates. Before he could unload them, 2 black SUVs rolled in. Men stepped out, 3 of them, bulky in dark jackets, hands in pockets where weapons likely rested. One of them, a thick-necked enforcer with a jagged scar down his cheek, stepped toward Connor. That's when Noah moved in, stepping from behind a stack of pallets, shotgun leveled. "Game's over." The scarred man reacted fast, pulling a pistol as his crew scattered for cover. The crack of the shot split the night and Rook came from nowhere, a blur of muscle and fur slamming into Noah's side. The impact drove them both down as the bullet whined past where Noah's head had been a heartbeat earlier. They hit the snow hard. Rook was already back on his paws, teeth bared, forcing the gunman to stumble back toward the SUV. The others fled under a hail of shouts from Quinn, who'd pulled her vehicle across the exit with lights flashing. Connor stood frozen, hands up, until Noah hauled him toward safety. The firefight lasted less than a minute before the SUVs tore off, tires spitting gravel, leaving behind only churned snow and the echo of engines fading into the dark. Rook padded back to Noah, breath steaming in the cold, a thin line of blood along his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. "You saved me twice now," Noah murmured, hand on the dog's neck. Connor, shaken, finally spoke. "You don't know what they'll do to me now." Noah's eyes were like flint. "Then we make sure they can't do anything to anyone again." The next 48 hours in Frost Hollow were a blur of cold air, tense conversations, and the hum of quiet preparation. The failed ambush at the storage yard had changed the game. Now Noah Calder knew they couldn't just circle Halverson's name in red ink. They had to take him down so thoroughly that no one could patch his power back together. Noah spent that morning at his cabin, the wood stove clicking as it settled into a steady burn. Rook stretched out on a blanket beside the desk. The shepherd's shoulder was wrapped with fresh gauze, courtesy of Quinn's steady hands, but he barely seemed to notice it. He lay with his amber eyes fixed on the door, ears twitching at every sound outside. Quinn arrived mid-morning, a travel mug in one hand, a battered laptop under the other. She'd pulled a night shift with emergency services, but the circles under her eyes were hidden by determination. "We've got one shot to do this right," she said, setting the laptop on Noah's table. Connor followed a moment later. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, stubble shadowing his jaw, his hoodie zipped tight against the cold. The swagger he usually carried had been replaced by something sharper, resolve. "I've got their schedule," he said without preamble. "Drop points, names, even which crates carry what. I wasn't supposed to see it, but they left the ledger in the glove box last week." It was risky trusting Connor, but Noah could tell the kid had crossed a line internally. There was no going back for him now. They needed more than paper and hearsay. They needed the kind of evidence that would lock a cell door. That's where Elena Marwick came in. Elena was in her late 30s, a state police cybercrimes investigator with a tall, angular frame and a knack for extracting data from even the most stubborn systems. Her black hair was cut in a practical bob, and she wore glasses that she pushed up her nose whenever she was about to explain something complicated. Elena had been stationed in Bozeman but came down to Frost Hollow after Hargrove called in a favor. "Hidden cameras are like cockroaches," she told them, her voice quick and precise. "If you find one, odds are there's more." She slid a small black device across the table, a pen-sized camera disguised in a wall hook. "We plant these in Grantham's main warehouse. You get me 24 hours of footage, I'll get you frame-by-frame timestamps and audio isolation." That night, under the cover of light snowfall, Noah and Quinn moved through the yard of Grantham and Sons. The building's corrugated metal siding was streaked with rust. the loading dock half lit by buzzing sodium lamps. Rook padded at Noah's side, silent as shadow, his body language low and deliberate. Inside, they found an alcove near the office door where Quinn, on her knees, affixed one of Elena's cameras behind a rack of safety vests. Another went up in the corner of the loading bay. Noah placed the last near the break room, where voices carried most clearly. For the next day, they waited. Elena sifted through the footage remotely, sending Noah short clips when she found something relevant. By the following evening, the air in Noah's cabin was electric. Elena's latest file showed two men unloading crates labeled Grantham Industrial Supplies, but filled with sealed bricks of white powder. In the background, clear as day, Halverson's voice was caught in conversation with one of the men. "We keep the drops on schedule. The council stays happy. If Calder's still sniffing around, he won't be for long." "That's conspiracy and intent right there," Quinn said, gripping her mug tight. The next break came from the ledger Connor had provided. Cross-referencing the dates with the footage, they matched 3 major drops to specific council meetings where land rezoning had passed in Halverson's favor. The pattern was too perfect to be coincidence. Noah leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "We've got him," Sheriff Hargrove agreed. He called in the State Police Tactical Unit, arranging for them to move in during the monthly town meeting, the one event where Halverson was guaranteed to show his face without security swarming around him. The meeting was set to be held in the old cedar-paneled assembly hall, a building that smelled of varnish and carried decades of whispered local politics in its rafters. The day of the meeting, Frost Hollow was brittle with cold, the air so clear you could see the smoke curling from chimneys a mile away. Inside the hall, folding chairs filled quickly. Farmers in canvas jackets, shop owners in sweaters, a few council members murmuring near the dais. At the front, Halverson stood with his usual polished ease, shaking hands, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescence. Noah entered quietly through a side door, Rook at his side in his K9 harness. Quinn and Connor slipped in a moment later, Elena taking a seat near the back with her laptop open, connected to a secure feed for the state police outside. Halverson began the meeting with a smooth welcome, moving into agenda points. He was midway through a speech about Frost Hollow's bright economic future when the double doors swung open. 4 state police officers entered, their badges gleaming. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man named Captain Russ Hensley with a deep voice and a lawman's unshakable stare, strode to the front. "Mayor Curtis Halverson," Hensley announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, corruption, and attempted murder." The room froze. A few gasps cut the air. Halverson's smile twitched but didn't fully break. "You're making a mistake," he said calmly. Hensley turned to Noah. "Deputy Calder, you and your team have the floor." Noah stepped forward, holding up a tablet Elena had prepared. The screen lit with grainy but clear video from the warehouse. Halverson's face, his voice ordering drops, his signature on falsified contracts. Then came the audio, unmistakable in tone and cadence. The hall was silent but for the recording, every person listening to the evidence of betrayal. Halverson's composure finally cracked. "You think this will hold up?" he snapped. "It'll hold," Noah said, voice even. "And it's going to take you down." As the state officers cuffed Halverson, Rook stood beside Noah, posture tall, eyes locked on the man who'd tried to erase both of them. Quinn exhaled slowly, Connor leaning back against the wall as though a weight had slid from his shoulders. Outside, the sirens began their long wail toward the county jail, cutting through the stillness of Frost Hollow like a promise kept. 2 months in Frost Hollow could change a lot. The deep freeze had broken into a damp, reluctant spring, the streets now lined with melting piles of gray snow and the smell of thawed earth mixing with chimney smoke. In those weeks since Mayor Halverson's arrest, the town had begun to breathe differently. Not loudly, but with a quiet relief that seemed to hang in the air like the mist over Willow Creek. Noah Calder noticed it every time he walked Rook through Main Street. The shepherd, now fully recovered, carried himself like he owned the sidewalks. Head high, ears alert, tail giving the occasional wag to shopkeepers who stopped to greet him. Rook's winter-thick coat had been brushed to a sheen, the faint scar on his shoulder just visible when the sunlight hit it. Connor Delaney had changed too. He was in the Frost Hollow Recovery Center now, a modest brick building on the edge of town where the scent of coffee and fresh bread from the communal kitchen always seemed to be in the air. Connor's once restless energy had softened. His face had color again, and there was a steadiness in his green eyes that Quinn hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just the absence of the drugs, it was the presence of something to fight for. Quinn herself had thrown more of her free hours into helping rebuild the community volunteer EMT program. She was often seen in her paramedic jacket, clipboard in hand, rallying new recruits with the same calm authority she used in an ambulance. Her auburn hair was growing longer now, often tied back with a simple band, and she'd been smiling more lately, a rare, unguarded kind of smile that had begun to appear most often when Noah was nearby. The day of the ceremony came with a chill wind off the mountains, carrying the smell of pine and wet soil. The town square had been dressed for the occasion, folding chairs lined up in neat rows, flags hung from the lampposts, and a small wooden stage built against the backdrop of the courthouse steps. Sheriff Walt Hargrove, wearing his dress uniform and polished boots, stood at the podium first, his voice carried with the ease of a man who had addressed crowds for decades. "Frost Hollow has been through storms," he began, "but storms show you who stands beside you when the wind comes hardest. Today we honor one of our own, a member of this community who may not wear a badge but who embodies the spirit of service and courage." He gestured toward Noah, who stood at the side of the stage with Rook at heel. The dog's canine harness was spotless, the brass tag shining. Beside them sat Marjorie Kemp, an older woman in her 70s with a trim frame and a tidy bob of silver hair. She was the director of the Frost Hollow Civic Committee, the kind of neighbor who always remembered birthdays and always brought pies to town fundraisers. Marjorie had fought tooth and nail at the last council session to protect the K-9 program from budget cuts, and it was her persistence, and public shaming of the more reluctant council members, that had kept it alive. Marjorie stepped forward with a small velvet box in her hands. "Rook," she said with a warm, tremulous smile, "on behalf of the people of Frost Hollow, I present you with the Medal of Valor." The crowd clapped as she pinned the medal onto the harness strap at Rook's chest. The shepherd shifted slightly, as if unsure what to make of the moment, then lifted his head toward Noah, ears perked. When it was Noah's turn at the microphone, he rested one hand on Rook's shoulder, letting the quiet settle for a moment before speaking. "The night of the crash, they told me my partner was gone. They told me I'd never see him again. And for a while I believed it." He paused, scanning the crowd, familiar faces of shop owners, farmers, kids sitting on parents' shoulders. But Rook wasn't gone. He was still out there, still working. Not because anyone told him to, but because he knew the job wasn't finished. He wasn't lying in the snow that night, he was on duty. A murmur of emotion swept the square. "I want you all to know," Noah continued, voice steady but carrying weight, "that this dog didn't just save me. He brought back the truth. And he reminded me, and maybe all of us, that sometimes courage is quiet. Sometimes it's just not quitting when you've got every reason to." There was a beat of silence before the applause began, then it built, echoing off the courthouse bricks, spilling out into the streets. Children laughed, people stood, and Marjorie wiped her eyes openly. Rook gave a low, almost embarrassed huff, leaning subtly into Noah's leg. After the formalities, people gathered in small knots around the stage, offering handshakes, back slaps, and more than a few dog treats to Rook. Quinn appeared at Noah's side, her gloved hand brushing his. "You did good," she said. "So did you," Noah replied, his gaze softening. "Guess we're both still on duty." As the crowd began to thin, the square was left with the flapping of the flags in the breeze and the faint clink of Rook's medal. Noah glanced down at his partner, who was watching the last of the townsfolk drift away. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Rook's tail gave a single, decisive wag. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not the loudest ones, but the quiet moments when we refuse to give up even when no one is watching. Rook's story is a reminder that loyalty and love can pull us through our darkest nights, and that the bonds we build can change the course of our lives. In our everyday lives, we may not be chasing down criminals or standing in the snow against danger, but we all face battles of our own. And just like Noah and Rook, we can choose to stand firm, protect what matters, and never walk away from those who count on us. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us your thoughts and your own experiences of loyalty and courage. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss more stories that remind us of the good still in this world. May God bless you and your loved ones, and if you believe in the power of second chances and the quiet strength of a loyal heart, write one word in the comments, Amen.